Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with Cindy Magnuson, and the show is about to begin. So, slow down, take a seat, put your feet up, and maybe take some notes, because this show is about you, it's for you, and it is designed to help you receive exactly what you need to be a happier and healthier you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is your host, Cindy Magnuson of C Source Energy Epiphanies. And tonight, I'm being joined by Bernhard Guenther in this third show of the series, The Elephant in the Room is Real, What Now? So Bernhard is one of the leading writers and speakers in the area of hyperdimensional energies and how they're influencing our lives. So I've asked him to bring his expertise to this series as we're working to look towards how can we collectively and individually integrate, heal, and dismantle these corruptions that have been taking place in our society as we see them very rapidly coming to the surface and being exposed. So Bernhard's expertise in the way of hyperdimensional forces is going to help us to understand what does hyperdimensional mean? How are they affecting our lives? How can we identify these influences? Where do they come from? Why are they here? How do they fit into this big picture? And how can we say no? So beginning a little bit about Bernhard, he grew up in Munich, Germany, and then moved to California in 1994 to study drums and percussion at the Percussion Institute of Technology in Los Angeles. His exploration into rhythm and music became a journey of self-discovery and healing, which led him into the field of bodywork and the healing arts. Being a very emotionally and sensitive individual and battling depression throughout his early life, Bernhard made the choice to face his shadows and face his fears. His personal healing process then inspired him to explore the mysteries and hidden knowledge of humanity's origins, and he began questioning the roots of what constitutes reality and looking at how social, spiritual conditioning impacts us on both a collective and individual basis as we're trying to search for truth right now and search for fulfillment and happiness in all aspects of our lives. His website, Piercing the Veil of Reality, is a wide-ranging collection of essays, films, webinars, and interviews that include topics in spirituality, shamanism, psychology, self-work, esotericism, history, the paranormal, and hyperdimensional realities. He lives in Topanga Canyon, California, working with individuals from all walks of life, helping them in their path of healing and wellness via integrative bodywork, holistic coaching, and transformational retreats. So let's open up the mic and say hello to Bernhard.
Hey, Cindy.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Hello. You are very welcome. I am honored. Thank you so much for your time and giving us your expertise here. It is very much appreciated. And with that introduction already, I would like to go right into the meat of what we're talking about here and begin with the word and phrasing hyperdimensional energies. So if we take the average person, maybe someone runs into this terminology, and they might have a varying amount of references already that they think this is. But can we narrow this down and look at it? Are we talking about something specific, or are we talking about a big collective when we say hyperdimensional energies? And what does it mean, hyperdimensional?
Well, on a very basic level, it simply means non-physical, something that exists out of the range of our five sensory perception. Hyperdimensional, another dimension, another density, but it's also very important to distinguish not anything that is a quote unquote, projection of ourselves, of our psyche or archetype, with a lot of people then claim that would be, but energies, intelligences that exist in their own realm, in their own world, but are not bound to time and space in this 3D existence we live, and the linear time we live under, or the illusion of linear time, so to speak. So yeah, on the basic level, it just simply means non-physical.
Okay. And as a collective, then obviously the non-physical is a very vast expanse. And of course, you and I have studied a little bit more, so we've understood that there is sometimes an alien reference, different races, extraterrestrial. Is this archons? Is this like the John Lamb Lash reference of these aborted fetus-like beings? Can you expand a little bit about what are we looking at sort of as an expanse of physical entities? And would you refer to them as entities, being energies? Can you even help us a little bit with understanding that?
Yeah, so you already hinted at it. Different teachings and esoteric knowledge has hinted at these forces. Like you mentioned, the archons from the Gnostic tradition, or you look at the Sufism, the Jing. You can see it from the Native American perspective, Wetiko, that alien virus, the Lords of Destiny from Hermeticism. You can go on and look at all these different ancient teachings, and they talk about the same forces, same beings and entities that have ruled over humanity and affect humanity and working through humans in ways that is not perceptible to our five sensory existence. Having said that, there's many races, so to speak, or appearances they've been given, or names. And what I found over the years, I just like to call them occult forces, which is also what Sri Aurobindo from Integral Yoga uses. He calls them occult forces, and occult simply means hidden, right? That's the basic definition. It doesn't mean evil. That's important to point out. So I like to call them occult forces because they are also shapeshifters that can appear in any shape or form, so to speak. So I don't get hung up anymore on their form, their appearance, so to speak. And there can also be, like some call them also reptilians, draconians, demonic entities, low astral entities, and all of that. And they can come in various shapes and forms, from like very demonic up to more like critter-like, benign even beings. But let's not forget, they are called hostile forces, but they're also the forces of nature, and they're actually also benevolent forces out there as well, right? Which we can maybe talk a bit as well. I just mainly focus on what Sri Aurobindo calls the occult hostile forces, because they have really interfered with the evolution of humanity, so to speak, but they also resemble a certain teaching function, so to speak. So we're constantly influenced by various forces, right? In the end, it's we are just under this illusion of almost of free will, of that we are in control because of this ego consciousness we're caught in, right? With the personality we identify with, but essentially we are transducers of energy. And as the ancient teachings talked about, the war is through us. So it's literally like we all have the inner, like the proverbial, like, the angel on the left shoulder and the devil on the right shoulder, so to speak, right? So we are influenced, very manipulated by these occult, hyperdimensional, hostile forces, right? Through thought injections or thoughts we take at our own, and they can manipulate us in various different ways. But then also the evolutionary forces or positive forces can also influence us via inspiration, right? some insights and nudging us this way and all of that. So it's an intermix of all, and the whole work of deeper spiritual esoteric work, right, is to reject the hostile interferences and embody the divine force more and more. So we become a transducer of the divine force and essentially align with divine will.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's in a nutshell.
Yes, and let me back up a little here. When we are, all right, I'm getting a little bit of an echo.
You getting an echo?
I'm getting an echo a little bit. It's starting to just lessen now, so it should be okay. Yes, okay, there we go. What I wanted to look at there then, before we go into how they influence us, can we even go back a little bit? If you were going to theorize, and what you've concluded in all of your very intense studies, how would you say these forces that are discordant were created in the first place? And if they don't have physical bodies, why is it that they're trying to work through our physical bodies?
Well, there are many different theories. If you go back, it relates to the original fall from Eden, from our original state of original blueprint. And, let's put it this way, we didn't evolve just from apes as the Darwinian theory claims, right? But we have been interfered with, even genetically, partly engineered by these beings, hundreds and thousands of years ago. But it was also, it's tricky because you don't want to fall into the blame trap that we have been just, that's another topic we can get into, the blame victim trap. But it was also a choice we made to experience this physical ego consciousness, right? And that's the fall from Eden, the symbolism of it. And, but, essentially it's also like we also, in this reality we live 3D, we are on the basic level, we deal with duality, right? So male, female, dark, night, and evil, good, so to speak. So essentially these forces, have played just their cosmic function from a higher perspective. And if you may say so, they're even also an expression of the one, the divine, because everything comes from the one, right? Yes. Just experiencing itself subjectively, the dark side of creator, so to speak. And you see even the yin and yang sign, right? The black and the white dot in the black and the black dot in the white. So everything is kind of still one and intermixed. And the reason they interfere with us, because on a very basic level, we as humanity, we're not on top of the food chain. As above, so below. Life feeds on life. And in this instance, food is not physical substance, but consciousness is food. And they feed off of a certain frequency, a certain state of consciousness. And they try to keep us in the so-called frequency prison, to use us as their food source, literally, to raise us like cattle. And what feeds them? It's basically anything that is related to our lower nature, our egocentric behaviors, our lower emotions, of anything of chaos, suffering, interpersonal fighting, jealousy, envy, sexual pathologies, anger, whatever we project onto the world. And, they create this frequency working through us, working through the world puppet leaders, the psychopaths and whatnot, creating wars and atrocities and genocide to feed off of that frequency and that emotional luge. Or in everyday life, when we get into fights with our neighbor, or with our partner or friends, and just take things personal and just, and provide that reactive, we are very reactive beings. We're very mechanical, we live under the illusion of free will, and most people are sleepwalking, dreaming to be awake. So we're manipulated in various ways to produce this emotional luge, as Robert Monroe called it. And that's really what they're after, so to speak. But in the end, they also, from the higher soul evolutionary perspective, they also resemble a very important teaching function, right? almost creating the trigger, the friction for the evolution of consciousness, right? To able to rise above that and essentially to transcend duality. That's because we're not finished in our evolutionary process, so to speak, here, right, as human beings. So that's very important to understand, because these forces also can only interfere with us and tag into us where we have our own blind spots and wounds and conditioning, which they then highlight and then augment, right? So essentially you can literally utilize them as teachers, so to speak, because they heighten it. But obviously becoming aware of it, understanding it, which goes beyond intellectual research, by the way. There's a lot of resources that hint at this knowledge. The shamans call it the topic of all topics. But, most people, obviously say like, well, you cannot prove this. I don't see it. How do you know that's true? Mm-hmm. Well, that's where the mind is limited by, because I said it, they exist outside our five sensory perception, but through esoteric work, inner work, right? That's when you can develop what Sri Aurobindo called yogic consciousness, a higher level of being, high level of consciousness, where you can then literally perceive or rather sense these forces directly. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you see them visually like maybe a clairvoyant can do, but it's a different state of mind, right? I call it sixth sensory cognition. And you sense there's something else kind of trying to intrude into you, literally coming from the outside. There's something else working through people that is just you're using them and in a very mechanical, programmed manner. And it's a different, way of, you start to see the unseen, as it's called in esotericism, but that only can happen when one is sincerely engaged in this inner work, in esoteric work, right? To raise your level of being to a high level of awareness. And it's a state where the mind alone, the rational mind, cannot follow.
Okay, yes. So on one hand, these energies exist because they're a natural part of duality. On another hand, they actually do serve a purpose in order to help our evolution along by demonstrating to us, when we can observe it properly, what our weak areas are, what our own personal weaknesses are. And then if we take that another level up and look at it, this means that to a certain degree, they only have influence here if we allow it. So this brings us to our responsibility, in a sense, as to what has taken place in regards to how far these energies have gone and the degree that they are perpetrating suffering here per se, then, in order to wake us up to the fact that we have so many weaknesses. And that is part, of course, of what this series is about, to take a look at. If we have inadvertently then, yes, given our power away, then we can take on this responsibility here and do something about this by, one, healing ourselves and taking our power back. So can you talk about to what degree we can work with this incredible amount of suffering that we are seeing has been taking place behind the scenes, that is absolutely at such a heightened level that literally much of humanity would rather have this stayed in the closet and not take a look at it. So can you talk about this, Bernhard?
Yeah. Well, first, you need to really understand the bigger picture in the context of the evolution of consciousness, right? And understand, I've struggled with this myself, understanding why is the suffering, right? Even my own personal life, I suffer deeply. I mean, not, compared to the darkness even that's going out there. It's been a lot of what's happening, in terms of quote unquote evil. Most people have no idea actually how dark it actually is. Way beyond what we're seeing even on the political stage. But it has its place, and it's really hard for our mind to grasp it. In fact, it cannot, right? From a higher perspective, the evolutionary forces, there's so much involved with regards to... sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Because Sorry about that. In terms of evolutionary forces, so much comes into the equation, especially in this day and age. It's called the time of transition. Everything to be revealed itself, right? I mean, it ties into the famous quote by Carl Jung: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So everything that's been hidden needs to come out. And even suffering in itself plays a very important role. Ironic, obviously we all no one wants to suffer. That's why we engage in inner work and truth, seeking, helping the world, or being of service. We want less suffering. We don't want to suffer anymore. We don't want other people to suffer, right? That's our role. But there are forces out there, and some of these forces occupy human beings fully, like psychopaths. They feed off of suffering. It's even beyond power and money. They just feed off it. It's their frequency, right? And who are we? We feed off of animals and vegetables. I don't want to get into discussion about veganism, whatever, but still, you eat, you feed your body. There's still like you kill, right? Even if it's a plant or animal, you still use something alive to feed yourself. So that puts also in question of evil, right? So are these forces, how evil are they? And in the end, they're just doing what we're doing on their own level, sustaining themselves, right? Which doesn't justify it, but it's really understand the higher perspective, the Hermetic law of as above, so below. And we are simply not on, God's favorite creation on top of it all. That's the illusion most people have, right? That we are just the main predatory species. And then modern psychology has also distorted it as much as I love Carl Jung's work in The Shadow, and I think it's very important work, part of the work as well. It also has its limitations, because not everything is a manifestation, expression of our shadow and psyche, and it's just all us, quote unquote, so to speak. Even, from the higher perspective, all is one, right? So that's the paradox.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, but it's really understanding, and then suffering has its own role. Like, I remember I came riding across from Sri Aurobindo, and the mother, his partner, and some student asked them, why do people need to suffer? What's the role of suffering? And the mother then said something very profound. It's like suffering is the only energy that pulls matter out of its inertia, right? That pushes us to evolve, to anchor the higher force. So suffering, has its evolutionary purpose to ascend to a higher state, to reconnect to our true divine nature. And I can take myself as an example. So many people ask me, why did you get into this work? Why were you interested? Are you just curious? Why? And all of that. And my simple answer is, I was suffering. That's my only motive. I was suffering deeply and even close to suicide, that I needed to figure myself out, understand the world, understand myself. Otherwise, I would have killed myself. So suffering drove me on. And even my best writing, still when I'm in a low point, that's when the suffering pushes me to seek more truth, to be more sincere in my aspiration, and seek God and the divine within me, right? In order then to truly transcend suffering, and not trying to get distracted by the 3D world, or try to buffer up my suffering with all these pursuits a lot of people do, right? Lack of love, lack of fulfillment, and then they fill it with stuff, relationships, or whatever, trying to compensate addictions and all of that. But everybody's suffering deeply, so it's about confronting that suffering within and not running away from it, these sacred wounds, so to speak. And once we heal ourselves and dive deeper and make the darkness conscious, then these forces have less and less a grip on us, right? And then we truly transcend it via anchoring the divine force, as I mentioned before. So, that's really important to understand, the evolutionary role of suffering and of these forces, because evil in that sense has its free will to exist. There's nothing wrong with reality. And that was something that was really hard for me to come to terms with, because I was definitely, as I call myself, a romantic revolutionary back in my days, and fuck the government, evil, and trying to get rid of the other side. But this is not how it works. You cannot get rid of the other side as long as you approach it from the 3D level on physical reality, because it is duality. The one simply cannot exist without the other, period. Right? So you want to transcend it, not from a just philosophical spiritual bypass way, we all one, like what the New Age is doing, right? And also not avoidance of evil, not denying evil, but looking it straight in the face, being aware of it, especially being aware of it, how it works through us, right? The shadow and how it affects us, how we participate in this divide and conquer of trying to fight each other, and then anchoring. Now that, what's missing in this day and age, I see a lot, especially in the truth movement, or like, even basic, self-work, psychological work and all is fine and good, but most people really miss that sincere aspiration to the divine force, the higher positive force. And understandably so, because a lot of people are disillusioned or conditioned with like dogmatic religion, which is also actually a product of this hyperdimensional force. All the dogmatic religion, right? It's a control system in itself, with the idea of some God outside of ourselves who judges, right? And then a lot of people turn to atheism and don't believe in anything anymore, right? But that keeps us in a closed loop as well. So that sincere aspiration to the divine, to something higher, is very much needed on the path. And we also need the other side, because as the esoteric law states, literally as an axiom, as many teachers have said, you cannot reach heaven until you have walked through hell. Or as Carl Jung said, the tree that grows to heaven needs to have its roots deep into hell. So it's the law of ascend and descend. We can only rise as high as low we go at the same time, right? It's not this evolutionary process. It's not, as the New Age or pop spirituality tries to tell us, this linear road, just up, up, up to more bliss and love and light. Which most often people mistake, like these emotions of feelings of bliss for true awakening, which it transcends actually any emotion or feeling, but it is also the shamanic descent into the underworld to battle demons within and without, right? To really anchor, to clear our vessel, to anchor the divine force, and that's how we also transcend the influences of these occult forces.
Yes, thank you for that. So definitely the divide and conquer at this time frame, when we are moving from one age to another age, as time is cyclical, these forces that are attempting to set a lot of confusion in, for one thing, and to have humanity not be able to address these forces that are operating through so many individuals as a unified group is something that, I would like to address here a little bit more. So individually, we do need to come to a stance within us that, to me, is like a paternal, or a maternal response that says, I am going to address you being out of balance because I am in a proper spiritual discernment space to state that. So how can we collectively move to unify ourselves maybe a little bit more in order to address this better as a whole, with being firm, being in a neutral stance of forgiveness, and yet saying that we are going to address this with our firm spiritual strength right now, the power that we have to say no. So can you talk a little bit about that for us, Bernhard?
Yeah, so several things. First of all, you're correct, especially in this time of transition, a lot of teachings have hinted at there's a huge shift happening, right? It brings up a lot, and the divine force is trying to anchor itself, but also shining light in all the darkness. And at the same time, the matrix and these forces are definitely on overdrive, trying to keep us in this frequency prison. They don't want to lose their food source, simple as that. But we need to be very careful when we talk about we, right? I hear this a lot in the collective and all of that. And there's a lot of people make the assumption just because we're all one, we're all the same, which is far from the truth. And even as the esoteric axiom states, there's no such thing as equality in the entire universe. And that may trigger some people, especially more identified with the left, but there's no such thing as an equality. And that's not a value judgment of better or worse, but there are vast different levels of beings, of soul integration with over 7 billion people on this planet, right? We may look the same from the outside in a physical appearance and whatnot. We're all humans, different races, different skin colors, whatever. But the inner life, from an esoteric soul perspective and level of being, is vastly different between human beings. Like as Gurdjieff, the mystic, said, the level of being between two human beings can be as vast as the level of consciousness between a dog and a human being. Right? Yeah. So, and that ties into another really, quote unquote taboo topics, which is soulless humans. Right, that not everybody has actually a soul, but a lot of people are simply automated vessels, right, which these forces occupy fully. Psychopaths, for example, and I'm talking about genetically born psychopaths that are not a result of childhood wounding or anything psychologically, but literally born without a conscience, right, who are simply empty vessels for these forces, and they cannot be approach of compassion, understanding, or trying to talk to them. And that's what a lot of people do who focus on the 3D level, right? They're trying to, they assume that everybody's the same and we can be just rational and show compassion and resolve it, all that, but this is not how it's working. And it also ties into law of free will, right? And understand the analogy of, the parent wanting to wake other, wake people up, so to speak, because we see how people are suffering and how they hurt themselves. And I see this a lot. That has been very struggling for me because I'm also very sensitive. I can see people's wounds and suffering very easily through their mask of personality. But you cannot help someone who's not willing to help themselves. You cannot force people to wake up, right? That's really an esoteric law. Everybody needs to come to start seeking truth and in this engage in the awakening process in their own terms, right? Like, reflect on your own life. Nobody forced you, right, to take in certain information or work on yourself. You came to this realization yourself, also because from a higher perspective, your soul was ripe, so to speak. And some people, I have a whole essay called Organic Portals, Soulless Humans, which people can check out on my website, and it's one of my most read essays. Right, and there are souls that have, when you talk about the chakra system, who simply only exist on the first 3 chakras, and they are not in a state of their evolution to even perceive higher knowledge. They cannot even activate the higher centers this time around, and there's nothing wrong with them. This is where they're at. They need to just experience physical reality as it is, right? So to think of any form of collective awakening is complete illusion.
Okay,
right.
Okay.
So that's very important to keep in mind. But what we can help the collective is simply through our own awakening, right? We can push the envelope, right? We will never fully transcend because we're all still connected. But the more we are sincere in our own work, change our own frequency, right? And spread information, spread seeds of awareness, which people then can pick up, out of their own free will or not. That's how we help the collective, right? That has a huge effect on the outside as we change our frequency. And when I talk about changing the frequency, I'm not saying it in the New Age term of just, thinking positive thoughts, be smiley and be nice to everyone, right? I'm not denouncing positivity on a basic level and optimism. Obviously, we need this without falling into the trap of just being negative and cynical and life sucks and all of that. Right, but that's that anchoring of the higher frequency I said entails the deep inner shadow work, right? To come face to face with the darkness, and then the more we embody that has tremendous positive effect on the outside world, and that's actually the true secret with regards to reality creation, right? And even my own work, in the past, I tried to quote unquote forcefully wake up others, right? Push information onto others. But there's a lot of resistance because these forces work through others, who are not engaged in the same work and then attack you. And but I also was infringing on free will, right? So there's something to be said about what Gurdjieff called external consideration, that you need to adjust yourself to the belief system, to others, and not give somebody something he or she didn't ask for sincerely. And sincerity is the key, because a lot of people ask, but they're not sincere. They're curious. They want to be spoon-fed. I see this a lot in this day and age, especially with the rising short attention span epidemic. They don't put in their own effort and work, and they want something done for them, right? They want to take shortcuts, but there are no shortcuts on this path. And also, everybody's such a unique individual, We all have our soul lessons and talents and karma to deal with in varying ways. The mind cannot even possibly understand or grasp it, right? So even these atrocities, what's happening, we see them from our limited mind perspective, but we don't see it from this higher supermind, divine perspective, what's really happening. Because from this true higher perspective, our higher selves, when we incarnated, we even chose certain experiences, even challenging experiences to one degree or another, because from this higher perspective, there's no such thing as good or bad experience. That's just our perception, right? There is only experience in light of the evolution of consciousness. So it's very tricky territory when we try to talk about, we in collective awakening and all of that. Even with my work, I'm not trying to reach everyone. I'm not trying to save the world. That's another trap, trying to save the world, right? And you fall in the trap of martyrism, of the missionary, and trying to be a savior and all of that, which just works in the favor of these entities. So, all of these things are very much needed to understand. Even human nature, like I mentioned before, on a basic 3D level, we're dealing, with, there's been done a lot of extra research out there that about 9 to 10% of humanity are genetic psychopaths. And that's a lot of people, 10% of humanity, right? And often they rise into positions of power, because that's how the world is set up, right? Ruthlessness. And, a psychopath, by the way, is not this version we see in Hollywood movies of the serial killer and crazy person, and they can be that as well. But a good functioning psychopath has an excellent mask of sanity. He or she can mimic even emotional states, can cry crocodile tears, but never feeling it, right? Can just say the right things, can appear very confident, and people see them as role models, right? A psychopath can be a political figure, a CEO, even a spiritual guru, and all of that, just playing that role and diverting people and abusing people, right? And they get ahead in this world because, imagine, it's even hard to imagine a state of mind where you have no conscience, you don't care at all, you see yourself as completely superior, you're not faced even fear of other people's suffering, you have no guilt, remorse, any of that whatsoever. You can go very far in this world, right? In this dog eats dog society. So even on that basic level, before we even speak about these hyperdimensional forces, people still have a hard time understanding that we're dealing with, psychopaths in positions of power, right?
Well, what I find is that if someone has not had a personal, up-close experience with a sociopath or a psychopath, they really have a hard time believing that anyone who appears human could be a completely different person behind the scenes. For myself, because I had, as an infant, grandfather who was a chief of police in Minnesota. He was chased Dillinger. He was the good cop turning in the bad cops, but he was also a pedophile and was getting by with this because of his public position. And then in molesting, several family members, that imprint on my sexual chakra meant that I gravitated towards having relationships with men who had this predator energy in them. So finally, by the time I had one last experience, I realized that this is a pattern, and I was able to believe because I was there and saw it happen and saw it being expressed in how this literally is someone who mimics human emotion and does not have a conscience. So it is difficult for humanity overall, to deal with this because they haven't had the experience. But now you were saying that these energies, hyperdimensional energies that are, within these soulless humans, that they are feeding off of this energy. So is this literally the only way that they can ever feel good?
I don't feel good. Like that's, it's just simply what they do, right? It's simply like, see it as mechanically, like, you can see they're also very, you can see it on the basic level. Like, like when a mosquito comes and sucks your blood, is it doing it because it feels good to the mosquito?
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just what they do. It just sustains them. Right. So it's simply like food, literally.
Oh, yes, this hive mind. I have actually seen it before. Now that I'm thinking about it, in 2 shows prior to this, I had talked about how a man had befriended me, and over a course of time, he ended up revealing to me that he was a rogue CIA agent who rescued women from human trafficking. And during that time, he was, moving me into fully telling me about this. He talked about human trafficking and how that is more a part of pornography these days, and how there's a category called violent and cruel. And he said I should go and check that out and see what's taking place there. So I did. And when I typed in this category, thousands of videos came up with the faces of women who were absolutely not acting, not there by their own volition. They were being tortured, and possibly to death in absolute terror situations of extreme pain. And so I watched one of the videos, and for one thing, 6 men felt very comfortable with showing their faces and with no concern how they would be held responsible for the acts that they were truly committing there. And 2, while they were raping her, they were in a frame of mind that was as terrifying as the act. They were all in the same heightened frequency of super excitation, but in a very feeding frenzy type state. No consciousness whatsoever, not even in the least. And to look at these men, you would normally you would not think this. I kept looking at them thinking, unless you are very tuned in, otherwise, that putting them in normal other places in society, you would not know that they are taking place with this act. It was absolutely horrifying.
But, I mean, there's even more disturbing things happening when it comes to pornography, like the dark web. I'm sure you heard of that, right? Of literally snuff movies and all of that. It goes way beyond what's available, of mainstream pornography. But speaking of pornography, it's important to understand that pornography is a symptom. It's not the cause, right? And it ties, as dark as it gets there, but it ties into one of the magic setups is the distortion of sexuality in general. And we see this in everyday life beyond pornography, right? None of us have been, use actually sexual energy in a healthy way, in the way it's supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to be if we would be fully aligned with who we truly are, right? Sexual energy goes way beyond like the lower nature expression of it, of just, fucking, or this lust, thing that makes you feel good. And we see it in everyday life in our society, right? And you see the distortion of sexuality. A basic example is like you see in the religion, right? How in any dogmatic religion, how sex and sexuality is sees as a sin. The body is sin, flesh is a sin, and this whole guilt trip of the Catholic Church and all of that. Right. Yeah. But then you see what the suppression does, right, to all the boys, the altar boys, and the priest, engaging in pedophilia and all of that. You see Indian gurus doing the same and whatnot. And then you have the other extreme in the West, so to speak, with the pornography and the completely glorification of just animalistic that animalistic lower frequency of sexuality. We see it in everyday life. We see it in advertisements. Sex sells, right?
Yes.
And it has become normalized. Sexual pathologies literally have become normalized, even more the violent ones with this, the popular, book and film, 50 Shades of Grey. That's pathology right there, normalized. Right.
Yes.
But you see the friction. Like me, I remember. Like me, I'm from Europe, Germany, right? So I grew up in Germany in the 70s and 80s. It was thankfully also. I watched. Hey, I'm a man. I can admit to it. I used to watch porn. I don't know any man who hasn't watched porn at some point in their lives, right?
Yeah.
Watched the drive. I've never been taught. My parents never educated me about sexuality. Nothing in school. It was only about the biology, right? But as the feelings come up in puberty, like you just try to handle yourself, right? So I got definitely influenced by that. That's just the basic, social programming, so to speak. But on another note, like I said, growing up in Europe, it's a bit almost more liberal. Like I remember we were on vacation at the lakes in Germany or the Mediterranean Sea. My parents were naked. Everybody was naked all the time, so the body was more accepted, right? I saw breasts and all of that, naked breasts, on TV. There was no censorship and all of that. And I remember going to the spas when I was, in my early 20s in Germany. There was always men and women together, completely naked. It was never separated. Now I come here to the U.S., right, and the land of the free, and everything is so sexualized. You see it in the entertainment industry, on the billboards, right, and all of that. And people, because sexuality goes beyond the sexual act. Like also men and women dress themselves up to get this, attention, to feed off of that sexual energy, right? And again, I'm not demonizing sex. It's beautiful. I'm not, you see the other extreme in the Middle East of women just like covering themselves up and all of that. Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm in the U.S. and then, I remember I wanted to be naked on the beach and I get a ticket. Like you're not allowed to show your skin. Right. And then I go to a spa and it's so strict, men in their own spa, it's that friction, right? It's so like, that's how the Wilhelm Reich's work is really profound, because everybody's just sexually frustrated, and that then results in pathologies on a basic level, because you see it in the outside world, because everything is so sexualized in the media and everything, but at the same time it's such a taboo, right? The body image, so that's how it works through the sexual frustration that creates then the pathologies, and that's why people then gravitate towards pornography and all of that, which is just also an symptom of that, so to speak. So just trying to, pornography is very damaging and just feeds these entities, obviously, and there are varying degrees of what people get into and watch, right? And I've worked with people, especially men, dealing with severe porn addictions, and it's not pretty at all. And many people deal with it. Like, if you look at internet statistics, porn is the highest grossing, thing people look up, but nobody talks about.
Exactly.
Even ironically, there's been statistics in the Bible Belt in the U.S., like with really religious people who preach against sex and pornography and gays and all of that. And if you look at the internet statistic, they have the highest view of pornography consumption on the internet. So, who knows what's happening behind closed doors, so to speak, right? So, but again, it's a much bigger issue, like Wilhelm Reich's work is really profound. He wrote a book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. He said the more people are sexually suppressed, the more they're easier controlled, right, in society. So that's what we're seeing, on the mass level.
Very much so. So in our state of allowing the religious construct to come in and create us in this Puritan type space for a while there, the backlash of that is that an opposing opposite creation is going to be created. So that's a teaching tool for us here, to observe what has been created out of what we agreed to in allowing changes to happen, for instance, through religious dogma that's very restrictive. And So the theme is for us to come towards the center in everything. And that's probably one of the greatest tools right here to recognize is that we can't be producing these extreme spaces that are going to create the opposite of something. And it just is a little bit of an example. I eat vegan and I'm comfortable with that. But if I have within me such an extreme space that now I can't allow anyone who's not vegan around me at all, I'm going to create that same opposing force in society with my own mental construct of how I'm choosing to live here, but more so by how I'm mentally framing it. So these mental frameworks that we adopt, for lesser reasoning in us, do create these polar opposites coming into reality. So what we need to do is work more in a central area between these poles, and that is what it appears is taking place right now as everything's coming to the surface to see. We can begin to use this higher spiritual discernment and determine how our own creative input for what we experimented with. I'm not going to say it's blame. I don't mean a blame or a shame, that kind of a space, but just a responsibility, and that we should, even as we adopt new understandings of working with reality right now, let's not make it extremism, because extremism doesn't promote holistic, balanced living.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take a 3-minute commercial break here, and then we will come back. And I just wanted to ask, have you been hearing that echo in my microphone over here?
No.
No, okay, so it's just a little bit of feedback that I might be hearing. Very good. So I'm going to take a quick commercial break here, and then I will come back in about 3 minutes, okay?
Sounds great. Okay.
Feminine Frequency Radio Network hosts shows 7 days a week. Call in to listen live 929-477-1183 and dial 1 to connect to the studio to ask a question, or listen online via blogtalkradio.com/Feminine Frequency Radio Network. Organic Frequency Radio Show is 1.5-hour live chat with Stephanie and Oksana and their lovely guests about the nature of existence and holistic way of living here and now, and perhaps even after. Join us every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Call-in number to listen live is 929-477-1183, and to ask a question, press 1 to connect to the studio. Our guests share their stories and walking path of their healing, along with services that they have developed and packaged for the rest of the world to experience and benefit from. We're here to hold a space for an exchange of experiences for the purpose of evolvement and expansion of consciousness.
Hello and welcome. You are now entering the corridors of Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with your host, Cindy Magnuson, premiering Thursday evenings, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Feminine Frequency Radio Network. You are invited on a talk radio journey to the center of self. Join us as Cindy guides you, the listeners, in sensory and perception upgrades where revelations and golden epiphanies pierce the veils of illusion. Don't miss this opportunity for your next dose of Twilight Epiphanies. Okay, hello again, Bernhard.
Hey, Cindy.
And you were talking about, which I really appreciated, the reminder here about how everyone is in different stages of reality and or their progress as a soul, evolution, and that we need to understand that we're not going to get the whole collective together unanimously. And mostly what we understand is there are times when someone is very open to learning, they're progressing, okay, they've got it, they move on. There are other people who maybe are just getting even seeded in this lifetime, and it may take them other lifetimes still to move through this. So as we do have, both of these forces coming to the forefront to see our polar opposites coming up right now and then to integrate and work with that. You talk about a timeline shift that is taking place. So can you talk about what your perception is, what your theories are, and what you see potentially may play out as these two worlds here are still together? So there's things like, are we going to share a reality for a while? Are there going to be two different mitosis and there's going to be a new earth? Are people going to simply transition and then incarnate into a new space? Is there also a potential that reality will just shift for us and it will be changed? So what are your common theories that you feel the closest to in regards to, as we do heal this, what may play out around us?
Yeah, I have hypothesized what I call the timeline reality split and wrote a whole essay about that, which people can find on my website. It's actually also available as a free ebook. And many other sources have talked about that. And just to be clear, when I talk about timeline reality split, I don't mean it again in the New Age fashion that we're just going to ascend to another planet or something like that, right? And this also, this is a process. This is not happening overnight, but I can sense it. You can see maybe everybody who's listening who's on this path sincerely in terms of seeking truth, self-work, that a lot is already changing in their reality. A lot of friends, longtime friends, go out of their lives. You cannot relate to people anymore, like people you were enthusiastically engaging with even just, weeks ago and whatnot, or months or years ago. And something shifts and changes. And, I feel that's what's happening. There's a certain amount of people who are here already, have the soul is ripe, so to speak. They're ready for the next step to transcend to a higher state, right? And that is then reflected in their reality. And that's what I mean by, it's not like we're leaving Earth to somewhere else anywhere, but there's an energetic shift happening, right? Where a lot of people then, the more we embody this higher frequency, then the less we'll be affected by these other lower matrix manifestations, right? And I don't mean this also in this New Age way of you create your own reality and just that you're going to live in a bubble, so to speak. Right. So I don't want to fall into the disease of solipsism, right? That's only, that's a whole New Age program in itself. But there's something to be said that we, the more you evolve to a higher state of being and frequency in the true esoteric meaning of the word, I always have to emphasize that, and doing the work to do so, then the outer reality will change and you will gravitate naturally more towards people who are on that same frequency. Right. And again, there's no value judgment in any of that. But through that, we also push the collective, but you also can less and less relate to people who are not on that frequency level and they naturally phase out of your life. It's basic physics, right? The frequencies just don't even match anymore. And they can not only relate to people, but where you have been living and all of that, all of a sudden you don't feel like, you cannot relate to your job anymore, to your surroundings, and you feel the drive to move somewhere, like your intuition, you're being pulled to live somewhere else, to do something else. So that's what I mean by timeline reality shift, right? And it's an individual process too. That's very important to keep in mind. That's why, you see it even on the 3D matrix, all this push for socialism, collectivism, identity politics, that's all matrix thinking, all matrix program, because it happens at the expense of the individual. So it's really important to mind that this journey is unique for every individual. And I see this even in my private practice, having worked with thousands of people over the years, to understand what works for one may not work for another. And that goes with literally everything in our world, in what's happening. You mentioned veganism, for example. I'm like, even with diet, I know what works for one may not work for another. And if you push what works for you onto other people, you fall into the trap of homogenization of humanity, of trying to make everyone the same, which is the underlying matrix agenda, modus operandi, literally, right?
Yes,
so it affects
agree.
all areas of life, literally, right?
Mm-hmm. And I can have a very empathic space for changing how things have been going on here in our meat and dairy industries, for example. But to push an agenda is a dangerous space, and the mentality that's coming from there has a lot of dangerous spaces. I did do 3 shows on this specifically, and kind of tried to address the fact that even as we are progressing here and what we perceive as spiritually progressing, we have to be cautious still to make sure that we are really looking a little bit in a higher perspective as to how we are allowing ourselves to express what we're doing, because we still fall into these old traps very easily. So, and thank you for, your information about the New Age, information when it came in. I started off 20 years ago, and I didn't make a lot of friends because I was red flagging in the books continuously, and didn't learn till, a little bit later on that, yes, this movement was very much it was infiltrated early on. And I just had a natural space for feeling that when someone is attempting to sell information, and there are certain words that are said, you can tell that you are trying to be mind controlled and suggested to think a particular way. And of course, this is one of the, insidious, subtle ways that they place 90% of information, let's say in a book or a program, that we would resonate with, but then 10% of it is very twisted. And that twist in there may come out after you've followed someone for 3 years already, and then all of a sudden they shift. So I see a lot of that also taking place, that, again, people give up their power a little bit too easily to a guru, as you were saying, and then that person shifts in what they are portraying to the public. And if you are paying very close attention, sometimes you realize that they've shifted their whole foundation of from what they originally started out with. And humans in general have a very difficult time with this. So it's a way that we are so easily programmed, and there's so many new age memes that people have all these collective memes in their head, and they say, well, I can't judge that person, or I should just perceive them on what I'm feeling from them, but not look at the whole picture anymore. So the art of discernment can very easily be persuaded and suggested away from. Can you talk a little bit about your feelings towards the precautionary areas that we should observe when we are doing information from any programs that include angels, guides, ascended masters, alien races that are here to save us, for example? Before we talk about the true benevolent forces that are out there, can we talk about this ascended master, the great work, between whether we go back through Aleister Crowley and Alice Bailey, up through cases of changes, but how do you feel about those areas?
Yeah, definitely. I also want to address what you just said earlier, which is a very important and good point. First of all, you said the New Age movement has been infiltrated. It hasn't been infiltrated. It has been created by the same forces. Just like dramatic religion. It's just the other side of the coin. But you made a very important point, because this information works in these subtle ways, as you just mentioned. It's not just obvious lies, but good disinformation is truth mixed with lies. Most often way more truth, but then the lie is put in and swallowed as well, if one is not discerning, right? Even with this whole New Age, you create your own reality, and, which was definitely popularized by the film The Secret, right? And all of that. Yeah. Even in that film, there are some truths in it, some deep esoteric truths, but it's very twisted, right? And then people swallow the lies as well, and then it puts them off the path. And you see this with many teachings and teachers and whatnot. Some of them consciously deceiving, a lot of them unconsciously, and that's, as a lot of people can be unconscious matrix agents, as I said, even teachers, authors, and whatnot. But they, over time, like any matrix temptation, they sell their soul, so to speak, and lose their integrity because they are swayed and tempted by more power, more success, more influence, and all of that, right? And then they want to reach more people and all of that, so they avoid talking about certain topics. They want to create a bigger following, sell more, and all of that. So the integrity goes down the drain, so the teachings go down the drain, right? So, and discernment takes various levels. So on the very basic level, even what I see a lot of people missing, especially in spiritual communities, New Age, is just basic critical thinking, right? And I say, the mind has its limitations. Obviously, sometimes we can be too intellectual, head-centric, but we still need to not demonize it, but understand it's a tool, and we need to understand how to use it, which entails learning basic critical thinking, which entails learning basic logical fallacies, right? When I see at my work, when I post about it, and people are trying to challenge me, I have no problem people challenging me or whatnot, but they engage in all kinds of logical fallacies, right? The most common one is ad hominem attack, like they attack me personally and not stay on topic. Or they put their grammar before, their logic before grammar, conclusions before research, meaning like even when I post something on Facebook, excerpt from a quote from my article, then they judge that without reading the whole article in context, right? Do research first. They have opinions about topics they have never sincerely looked into it themselves, right? But come to conclusions too fast with all kinds of assumptions, which also ties in another extremely common logical fallacy is the strawman argument, right? And meaning strawman argument, you completely misinterpret what the person said and then try to attack that, like the strawman. On a more mainstream level, that's what Jordan Peterson has been dealing with as he became more popular. People completely misconstruing what he says and then attacking that. Right? So that's just on the basic level. You need to understand basic critical thinking, right? And then I just posted an article today about what also ties into resonating. A lot of people in the spiritual New Age realm, this resonates for me, it's true, and I don't resonate with that. And you should always, trust what you, just go to with what you resonate and whatnot. And while there's obviously truth to resonating with something, it can also be easily distorted and misapplied, right? A lot of fundamentalist Christians resonate truly emotionally, with the whole being, with the Bible in literal terms, and feel that the earth is only 5,000 years old, right? So, same with the New Age. Just because something makes you feel good doesn't mean it's true, right?
Yes.
Number one.
Yes.
Secondly, just because something instills fear in us and makes you uncomfortable also doesn't mean that it is not true. So this whole resonating thing has to be very carefully understood, because, if the reading instrument yourself is not tuned correctly, you can resonate with lies, mistaking them as truth because of your wishful thinking and all of that. And that implies, though, to be truly discerning, you need to train your mind, understand critical thinking, and also, because it goes beyond the logic and the mind, engage in inner work, right? To work through your bias, conditioning, program, wishful thinking, to really resonate with truth, even if it's a truth that you do not like to see. It's not your preference, right? Truth is not about preference. So that really needs to be understood, and how easily, that ties into counterintelligence programs, right? Which people, a lot in the New Age, especially in the UFO community, there's so much disinformation, truth mixed with lies, and conscious agents and unconscious agents, especially in that area, because they want to divert people away from the truth of the hyperdimensional matrix and all of that, which then brings me to the topic what you just mentioned with all these ascended masters, positive aliens here to save us, the Galactic Federation of Light, which is the major disinformation program, right? Which ties into also, the aliens are here to save us or bring technology and defeat the cabal, as some prolific, people in that scene claim, and they've made prediction for like over decades that never happened, but always dangling the carrot in front of you, like soon it will happen, first contact and all of that, right? But it's just disinformation. Like there's also not understanding that the UFO phenomenon is, for the most part, a hyperdimensional, topic has nothing to do with like a Star Trek scenario of physical aliens coming from another planet, right? We've been also conditioned with Hollywood, modern culture, so to speak, pop culture and all of that. But, this whole savior program also ties, it's no different than the religious savior program that Jesus is going to come back, right, to save us. Now it's the aliens going to come here to save us. And then you have the charade of ascended masters, right, or beings and entities that are here to help us and we should call in and connect with. And that's very tricky because that can create trap of agreements because, if you truly study occult literature and deep esoteric teachings, they're warned of these beings and entities because most often negative forces appear as positive forces, even as divine forces to manipulate. They can, even adjust to a person's belief system, appear as a Virgin Mary, appear as a Palladian, whatnot, to give that hook to, make them feel special, especially ego, hooks and all of that, and give them information that can be partially true, but again, it's a mix of lies, especially the whole charade of channeled material. And then, there's some quality channel material out there as well. I've studied as well, but for the most part, it's just a lot of New Age nonsense. But regardless what channel material you look into, it's never, ever the 100% truth. It always still comes through a filter. And most filters and most channels, even if they were pure at the beginning or more accurate, are being hijacked and vectored off. Barbara Messinek is a great example, I definitely resonated hugely, got a lot of insight from her first book in the early 90s, Bringers of the Dawn.
Yes,
but then progressively it got worse and worse. And I remember was at a workshop, channeling workshop she gave in Sedona in 2005, and she completely lost the plot. Right, there was something dark coming through her. The ego, her ego was definitely feeding off of it. But what was even more disturbing, she had such a devoted crowd, that guru worship, right, that didn't question that. And that's the problem, right? This whole following somebody else and trying to belong. People want to just be a part of a community, and it's understandable, but they lose their individuality within that, right? For example, in my own work, that's, I'm not saying that I know it all omniscient. I have my own issues, my blind spot, right? And I look back at my older writings, okay, I was off there. Like, I believe I had my own New Age phase many years ago. I even write about it, right? But I know my sincere aspiration is like truth as it may be. And I also have learned I'm not taking any teaching or anything as a foundation, right? It's just that I don't follow any particular personal guru, right? And even the people I quote in my work, that doesn't necessarily mean that I completely agree or support the whole body of work. For some of them I do more or less, yes, but I hardly agree with everyone. I don't even agree with myself all the time. Because I'm just, I find it to be true too, It's a process, right? And seeking truth is not only about this intellectual information, but also, even what my work also resembles my own process where I'm at. And as I said many times, I never claimed to be fully awakened. That word is thrown around very loosely as well today. I'm awake, and most people are maybe awake on some level of the matrix, but not awake in the true esoteric meaning of the word, which will be enlightenment, right? So, though that we need to be very careful and mindful and not overestimating ourselves and how people fall into spiritual bypassing, but also especially being careful of calling in any entities and beings. And I focus, as I said before, a lot about the occult hostile forces, negative forces, because it's about making the darkness conscious. And so, again, people who don't read my work, they pull strawman arguments. Like, for example, I've gotten that a lot. People claiming that I say that there are no positive forces, that there are no spirit guides, that it's all evil. right?
Mm-hmm.
And that couldn't be further from the truth, because I have actually addressed it in my work. If people would take the time to read it or listen to some of my other interviews, it's all there. I see the support, sense the support, feel the support in my own life throughout the years, the divine forces, and I even know that I have spirit guides. I've been even told that I have spirit guides especially when I do my work, body work, energy work, which is also my gift, done for 20 years. I've worked on various very sensitive individuals, clairvoyants, and they independently from each other told me that I'm really supported and guided through these large blue guardians, right?
Yes, I feel them. Yes, I feel them. Yeah.
So they're just there, but I never call them in. I don't need to.
Exactly. And that is the space where I think, of course, the new age information has slightly diverted some people's understandings, that we can just work with that space within us because they are part of us. It's something that's within us, but we're just observing it outside of ourselves. And that's where we inadvertently, others are giving their power away without realizing it. And, as you were talking about why we brought up this subject from Ascended Masters to how there are so many different versions of what really is taking place in the UFO phenomenon, for example, Star Trek influencing that. And because we don't have the basic understanding of the construct of how reality really works, all of these other influences have been able to come in and put these imprints and programming into our heads, into our memory banks. So what people don't realize is that every time they approach a new topic, they're approaching it from the stance of whether or not they are evolved or what programs, what level of of evolution they're at in their spiritual development, and then what programs have already been placed inside them that are going to be how markers for how they integrate what they're learning. So people are integrating a lot of the TV programming that's out right now, and you and I are aware that people like ourselves probably watch television shows. I like Netflix and to see. I basically watch series to see what they're putting out there because I can catch where they are putting that 10% of disinformation in there to completely divert people from knowing the full truth. And a lot of it is making people feel like they're powerless and helpless. So if we can kind of even come into another summary part here, I wanted to just tell you about a couple experiences I had in regards to like hyperdimensional energies. One, I talked in private with you about dreams, and when I was working with a family member and how the energies were coming in, and it was specifically showing that they were here to try and they were attacking a family member to get to me in the first place. And again, I'm just going to leave that as that. I'm not going to say that's not something that I created or allowed in my mind, but that's just what it was at that time. And not too long ago, I had what was kind of like a MyLab type dream in where I suddenly appeared in the dream, and there were men in there who had supposedly kidnapped me, and they were telling me that I had to read something off a spray can, and they had an injection needle on the table there that they were going to inject me with. And I literally was lucid enough to just be aware. I simply, even though I was feeling fear, I stood up and just didn't say a word and walked out. And as I walked out, there were military men sitting on each side of the hallway. So I kind of like realized that because I had been on a certain website, I got targeted at that time with that. But because I have a standard agreement within me that I stay with, that I don't accept harm. I don't do harm. I don't accept harm. I'm totally not claiming perfection here. Absolutely. All the time. And I don't allow, in my set space, I say, I don't allow that power over me. And so I was able to walk out, and they had no power. And of course, we know that if things can happen in the dream plane, which our dreams are being affected these days, that it can happen in reality. And just recently also, as I've kind of been coming into a little bit higher awareness, I've had a dream where a man in a suit was chasing me. And this is very common. It's interesting, all these shows were coming up. It's very common for me to have those Matrix type dreams where a man in a suit, like a Men in Black type situation, is chasing me. And I woke up, and the thought was that he wanted to kill me. But when I woke up, I said, okay, I'm not buying into that anymore. I literally went back into the dream, fell asleep, and I allowed him to catch me. And he had me in his arms, and for some reason my baby finger was in his mouth. But all I kept thinking was, okay, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. So you might kill me. Okay, it might hurt a little bit. I'll just fake I'm dead. And that was whatever, for whatever reason I was thinking that. But when I had that thought, okay, I'm not afraid, nothing happened. Literally, he never bit down on my finger like I thought he was going to, and the dream just dissipated because I had changed my perception of fear being in there. So can we talk a little bit more on that note, come to the summary of the show here, on the fact that we do have the power to, and when I use the word protect, I want to put it in a context of protecting ourselves for this. Similar to how I did in the dream, I have the power to protect myself from my own fears of this. I have the power to protect myself from giving my power away, if that makes sense, in how I'm saying that. And I know you've spoken about how we need to just come to our own power and through the work and et cetera. So how much free will do we have over disconnecting ourselves from these energies? And is there a universal law protecting us? Meaning
Absolutely.
that did I engage a universal law there?
Absolutely. Yeah. You made, there's a beautiful example of how you not only you change your perception, but you change your frequency by that responding, by staying in very important, all occult teachings talk about it, what I also call 0-point non-reactive consciousness. You didn't give them that frequency they wanted, that fear response, right? So it was no frequency match, so lost literally interest, and that's how mechanically they work. If we can resist to give them what they want through our mechanical emotional reactions, we starve them, so to speak. They move on. That's depending on what entity, but sometimes it needs to be repeatedly because you're being tested and tempted in so many ways to react this way. So hence the esoteric work to stay embodied, to not react, to respond consciously, right? And especially, also making boundaries, say no, like it's also getting this warrior attitude. That's another disinformation in the new age, that we need to send these beings love and light and send them to the light, and no. I have cussed them out. The anger is actually more appropriate response than fear, right? To stand in your ground, in your warrior self, right? And you shall not pass, basically, right? Like Gandalf. That kind of that frequency, that kind of gives, creates almost a quote unquote respect and serves as a protection. And cancels out the agreement to not agree to that, right? It's all about trap of agreements. But all of everything you mentioned, and I'm going way deeper in all of this in an upcoming webinar I have in November, literally an 8-hour webinar over 2 days, 4 hours, Saturday and Sunday, November 10 and 11th, about occult forces of higher dimensions, entity attachments, interferences, and discernment, clearing, and protection, and lay it all out. And that's what you just experienced, is a great example of exactly not giving into fear, which is very important, because there's a whole trap of fear and paranoia, right? Especially with that topic, and that's a frequency. Almost once you get into that frequency, it's almost like an agreement for more attack, because you lock into that frequency they want you to be in. And if you don't give it to them, right? And also understanding that fear is literally an illusion, right? It doesn't exist. When you're afraid of something, it's because you project of something what might happen to you, right?
Yes.
Some sort of if scenario, what's going to happen to you, because in the present moment, there's no fear. There may be danger, yes, but fear is still ultimately a choice, right? Even like, let's say, on a basic physical level, you're somewhere in the jungle, like in India, whatever, a tiger is charging at you, right? I mean, obviously you can get afraid, oh my God, this tiger, what's going to happen to me? But still, it's like, there's danger, but it actually doesn't help you if you respond with fear, right? There's danger, but if you can collect yourself, even animals pick up on that, right? On the, even on that general level, like the more you're afraid, the more actually the animal will charge at you, right? Because it sees you as weaker. But if you can hold your ground and not give into the fear response, animals also react very differently, for example.
So these hyperdimensional energies will react differently when we can learn through experience to embody these spaces and then recognize that it's taking place through things like the dream work and reality changing.
Dream work, and also understanding that they always that's very important, keep the tag into our own weaknesses and blind spots, our own trauma we already had, and create more fear and worry, right? I see them myself when I get attacked through these forces, through my own mind or other people. They always tag something that responds to them, like a wound, like a blind spot. For me, sometimes they target what my own wound has been, like guilt and shame and all of that, right? And then the fear, like whatever comes up with all of that. So they always target, what's already within us. So again, like I said, from this higher, earlier in our interview, from a higher evolutionary perspective, we can utilize them as quote unquote teachers, because they can only target that within us we haven't healed yet, and then exaggerate that and try to feed off of that.
Yes. So that's the way that we neutralize it. And again, to emphasize that it has to be experienced. So people have to be willing to experiment and observe life to determine how they are progressing along here, but to be more objectively observing themselves. And that's what it seems people have a difficult time with. Well, Bernhard, that was very powerful. Thank you. I was having a little bit of feedback here earlier on my microphone, but hopefully that didn't pick up too much. But beautiful information. You are so incredibly thorough. I want you to know that I specifically, wanted someone like yourself on because you stand in such a balanced place as you are approaching teaching humanity and doing your great work here. So I very much appreciate you. And again, you did tell the audience about your upcoming webinar. I most certainly will be on that webinar with you, so I will be signing up for that. I can't wait to enjoy that more thorough look into what you already spoke to us with. So I love the fact that we ended up here on a beautiful positive note. And if you ever would like to come back on another time, we can even go into the positive benevolent forces and even look a little bit more into that. But I thank you very much for your time. And in closing here, what would you like to give the audience, and then also information-wise as to how people can contact you to also work with you and sign up for your upcoming webinar?
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Cindy. I really enjoyed that interview. We can definitely do one again in the near future. Also, I also talk more in depth about positive forces in an upcoming webinar, and people can sign up to it and get more information about it on my website, veilofreality.com. And the date for the live webinar is November 10th, 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. PST, and then also Sunday, 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. PST. And both segments include question and answers, so people can share their thoughts, ask questions. But it also will be recorded, so everybody who signs up will also receive the full recording, and it will even be available after the live event, so anybody who can make it to the live event can still purchase the recording as well. And go to veilofreality.com. There's under webinars. You can get more information and sign up. And there's, that's my website, veilofreality.com. There's tons of articles, essays. I have 3 free ebooks on there, films I made over the years, a lot of interviews, other webinars, panel discussions. And I've also a very amazing event coming up, which I'm looking forward. That's a bit far away, but September next year, September 2019, September 7th till 14th, the Heaven and Earth organization invited me to be featured speaker at a cruise off the Croatian coast, the Adriatic Sea, and it's on a private yacht with only 30 people. And I'll be giving talks and lectures every day, and we travel on the Mediterranean Sea and also, check out beautiful locations on the coast. There's amazing food out there. And she has the founder. She has organized these cruises before. Also, even with Graham Hancock was featured at one point, Nassim Hiram, and other people. So next year it's my turn, so to speak, and I'm very honored that she approached me, and I'm really looking forward to that. And
fun time too.
Exactly, fun time too. It's also a great way just to, I like it. It's just not just about me, whatever, talking, lecturing, but bringing us like an intimate group together to network, with like-minded people, where you can really explore all of that together and make lasting friendships and connections, right? So that information is also more on my website. There's a link then to the Heaven and Earth organization, and then they can check that out. And we still have there's even some discount tickets available for the first people who sign up. And again, veilofreality.com. Everything is on there.
Okay, perfect. All the best to you then on your upcoming webinar. I wish you great abundance and prosperity, because you absolutely deserve all of that for your incredible generosity already that you've given. And for sure, we will talk with you again. Thank you.
Excellent, Cindy. Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And thank you everyone for joining in. Next week's show, I will be interviewing Luis Diaz, and he's going to come on and talk about spirit. How is it that we are all working with spirit in the same ways, yet we don't understand this and have a difficult time being unified in our understandings, because we all have been taught different beliefs about spirit, and we all don't have the same in-depth understanding. So Lewis is coming on, and we're going to talk about how we can work with the spirit plane in more greater understanding. So thank you everyone again. We will see you next week. Bye-bye now.